YouTube. We're excited to have Colton Houston here with us today. Colton is the co-founder of HD Intelligence, who does consulting work and does analytics for basketball programs. I hope that description was okay, Colton.
100%. It's great.
And before that, Colton spent many years in college basketball, including 9 at the University of Alabama, right? So he is here today to talk to us about analytics. We've had a lot of feedback from our members that have asked for more analytics. So we went straight to the source, the best in the business, Colton. So excited to have him here today. Colton, go ahead and take it away.
Man, Adam, thank you so much. Adam shared with me that there's been a request from his members for more analytics, which is really exciting to me. So anytime I have a chance to talk to, coaches, aspiring coaches who are interested in analytics, I love doing it because it's something I love to talk about. I have a presentation that I'm going to go through here today. I think the title is Effectively Incorporating Analytics into Your Program. It is meant to be applicable really at any level. Now, as Adam mentioned, I've worked at Alabama, so I've been at kind of the high major college level. That's what I know the best. I spent a couple years coaching high school ball. I'm familiar with that as well. I know we probably have folks here across the spectrum: Division I, high major, low major, D2, D3, professional, G League, NBA. You might have some WNBA, whatever. So hopefully this is helpful. All right, I'm going to go through this presentation, but give me 1 second here, guys, to get it queued up. But I also want some Q&A, so I can take some questions during, but I will also leave time for questions at the end. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and start. So I'm sharing the screen. Can everybody see? It's a PowerPoint presentation. Are we good on this, Adam?
Yep. Looks good.
All right. And I'm going to start the slideshow from the beginning. All right. So effectively incorporating analytics into your program. That's what we're talking about today. And I know some of you guys in here, it's nice to see some familiar faces, but obviously most of you probably don't know me, haven't heard from me before. So just a little bit about who I am and who our company is, what we do. So we're called HD Intelligence. We are the first full service analytics company, basically to do analytics for college basketball. And what does that mean, full service? We're going to get into that, a lot of the different ways that we try to help teams with analytics. My background, as Adam mentioned, I was at Alabama for 9 seasons, most of those as director of operations, where I did a lot with analytics, a lot with scheduling. I put my cell there. Feel free to jot that down, or I'm happy to share this presentation afterwards. I like being in contact with folks, answering questions, forming relationships. I'm happy for you to reach out to me, Twitter, email, cell phone. So that's there. My partner over here, Matt Dover, we're 50/50 partnership. So HD Intelligence is the two of us and, a couple interns at the moment. But Matt is, you can see his credentials right there. He's about as good as it gets when it comes to data science, statistics, modeling. And make a long story really short, he's got about a decade's worth of experience working in mainly the political and policy realm, but connected with us at Alabama back in 2017. And we worked together for a couple years while I was still there. And then we both left what we were doing to form the company. So he's more the data expert and I'm more the basketball guy, but there's a lot of overlap there. So that's who I am. That's what we do. I want to just say that a lot of the things you'll see as we go through this presentation are going to be branded with HDI. You're going to see some HDI type of reports. But I want to be really clear up front. This is not meant to be an infomercial for us. This is not some type of sales pitch. This is meant to be a way to help you guys think about whatever context you're in. How can we do a better job of incorporating analytics into our program? Not just to say that we're doing it and to sound good, but to try to be better, to win more games. And so the stuff I show you is shared in that spirit. All right. So hopefully this will be practical. I mean, look, I'm not going to lie. We love to work with more teams. We're trying to grow, but at the same time, I want this to be something you can take some nuggets, some practical application, maybe get your mind turning in a different direction that'll end up benefiting your program. All right. So I want to start with the basic question. What do we mean by analytics? Everyone's heard the word. It's got a little bit of a, kind of controversy attached to it in some circles, even it's certainly a buzzword across sports and even beyond. But, you know, if I'm trying to define analytics in my own words, in really simple language, this is what I say. It's using data to make better decisions. That's all it is, right? So we all do it in our professional and our personal lives. But analytics shouldn't be something that scares us or something that sounds daunting. All we're doing is using data to influence in a positive way our decision-making process. And here's the kicker. It's something we're all already doing. And specifically as coaches, we all use analytics. You may not think that's what you're doing, but if you look at data, either before or after the game, if you look at data to try to inform your decision-making process, you are taking part in analytics. So just quick thought experiment. I haven't met most of you. I know some of you guys, some of you we've never met before, but I can guarantee that every person on this Zoom right now, if you're a coach or if you're a support staff person, you do two things before and after every game. All right. Hold on. There we go. You watch video, you look at stats. I've never met a coach at the high school level, at the college level, never been to a clinic, never worked with somebody who didn't do both of those things. All right. So, we can think of a ton of examples. At halftime, you grab the box score. Post game, you grab the box score. You obviously want to watch the film of your opponent. You watch the game after you play the game. We all do that. And by doing that, you're admitting with your actions, even if you don't say it or even consciously realize it, that we need both things. We need kind of visual, right? Video of what happened, or maybe you watch your opponent in person, same idea, right? You need that visual aspect of it, but you also need the data. You need the stats. Imagine trying to scout an opponent with no stats, only video. You'd miss a lot, wouldn't you? Or imagine trying to scout an opponent with only stats, no video. You'd miss a lot. So you need both. But see, here's the difference to me. The difference is, even though we all do both, the video aspect is constantly getting better. Like, I know just in my tenure at Alabama, we went from using DVDs for film exchange and for scouting purposes to going digital. We went from SD to HD. We switched software companies, video software companies 3 different times. And each time it got a little better, right? We went from using a camcorder to record practice to having like these mounted cameras in the arena that were digitized. We're used to that, right? That's how things are in the video space. We're used to every year it gets better and better. Stats are not like that. A lot of coaches who look very successful coaches even are using the same stats to evaluate performance they used 20 years ago. And it's not because there's not available stats out there. There are, but that's just the nature of stats are different. And that's something that we're trying to help push forward. So why use analytics? I like to think of this analogy, use the analogy of an analytics wave. And I think at the NBA level, which, we're all, I'm sure, fans of the NBA to some degree, I really think that analytics wave has already come through the NBA. 10 years ago, they were really in the middle of this revolution of, teams were being run with analytics as really the driving force behind decision-making processes. There was some resistance to that, but I really think that revolution's taken place and that wave has swept through the NBA to the point where I don't think there's a franchise that doesn't have a fully staffed, fully funded analytics department, that doesn't lean on analytics heavily in the draft process, the free agent process, in terms of what they run and who they hire and how they play. But at the college level, where I've lived and where a lot of you live, we're behind. And not only are we behind on that wave, but that process is a slower process, right? There are more teams. There's not 30 teams. There's 300 plus. And change is slower for a variety of reasons. So, I would say that the wave is coming through, and whether you like it or not, and my guess is if you're here today, you're interested at some level, right? You probably think this is a good thing. I think it's a good thing, but this is where the game is going. I don't know that that's debatable, right? The analytics are going to become more and more important to the game at every level, high school, college, you name it. So here's what that means. It means that the coaches and programs that embrace analytics will have an advantage. Eventually, we're all going to be there at some level. But the early adopters, the ones that make the investment now to learn and to stay ahead of the curve, are going to have an advantage over the teams that don't. So what is that advantage going to be? Let's get like really practical and down to the details here. I think there are 2 big picture ways that analytics help your program or help give you an advantage. Let's put it that way. Here's the first, and it's the most obvious one. A strong analytics operation is going to help your program be more successful, right? AKA, you're going to win more. That's the bottom line. And you'll hear me say this a number of times during the presentation. If your investment in analytics or your use of numbers, I mean, I just noticed there's a typo up there, analytics advantage. I'm gonna have to fix that. But if your work in analytics isn't helping you win games, you're really wasting your time. All right. So I'm going to be really coming back to that a lot in terms of the practicality of what you do and making sure that there's action steps and things you can do that are extremely practical. All right, let's look at some specific examples. I got 4 here. How can you actually win more games by using analytics? Well, the first is you're going to understand your team better, which means you're going to be able to coach them more effectively, which should translate into wins. A lot of coaches refer to this as, self-scouting. If you are a coach, you probably think you know your team really, really well. But I would just say, stop and ask yourself, do you really know your team as well as you think you do? Okay, you may know who your best players are, but do you know which 5-man defensive lineup has the lowest, points per possession allowed? So if you really need to stop, these are the guys you put on the floor. Do you know which players have the greatest impact on team success on each end of the floor in terms of both overall efficiency and specific stats like, team rebounding rate, turnover rate, things of that nature? Do you understand how players interact with one another when on the floor? The better you know your own team, the more effectively you can coach them, which should translate into wins. Here's the second one. Know your opponent better. Right? If you know your opponent better, you're going to prepare more effectively. You're going to be able to win more games. I'm going to give some examples here in a little bit of some stuff that we helped teams with this past year. We worked with a number of clients, but one of our clients was Cincinnati. And they had a brand new coach, John Brannon, who I worked with at Alabama. And he got the job at Cincinnati. We talked, and to his credit, he said, we want to use you guys. I think this is a worthwhile investment for our program. And at the end of the season, he shared with me that, they had a staff meeting where they're evaluating everything. And probably the best compliment I got in the past 12 months was him telling me that when they sat down to evaluate the scouting process and, the budget, all types of things they have to think about after the season, that he sat down and they were talking about HD intelligence and scouting. And he said, guys, I'm just going to put it like this. HDI won games for us, primarily through the scouting element. We were able to know how to attack certain teams, how to defend certain teams that we wouldn't have had that information otherwise. And I really think we were 1 to 2 wins minimum better because of working with them. And I told him, I was like, Coach, that's all we're trying to do. If you feel that way about us, that means we've done our job. All right, here's the third way I think analytics can help you. You can evaluate recruits and transfers, right? If you're at the professional level, obviously potential draftees and signees more effectively, which results in a better roster, win more games. We all know, no matter what level you're at, the number one most important variable to success is how good is your roster. It doesn't matter if you're John Wooden if you don't have any talent, right? So we're all trying to beef up our talent level at every level. Is there a role for analytics in that process? I think there absolutely is. I'll be blunt with you. I don't think that there's a lot of room to evaluate high school players through analytics and do a much better job than we're doing now. I think that day is coming probably pretty soon, but the data there is just not very good at the moment. But anything above that, like at the college level, transfers, evaluating potential transfers, even JUCO transfers, and then obviously at the professional level, evaluating, college players, other professional players. I think there's a tremendous role for analytics. And one of the things we do, we're not going to get into it too much here today, but we help teams with what we call transfer analytics to think about, do I take the kid from a mid-major with really good stats, but who didn't play in a very strong league or on a very good team? Or do I take the kid who was, maybe had a more, not quite as strong a role, as big a role at a better school or in a better league? All right, and here's the fourth way it can help you is really a niche specific to college. So if you're not a college coach, this aspect's not going to be very interesting to you. But if you are in college, especially Division I, this should be incredibly important, and that's schedule optimization. Again, this is kind of a niche. We do this for a number of schools. We're not going to get into the details much farther on this because I want to be respectful of those of you who don't coach in college, and so this isn't as important. But if you understand how important scheduling is to your chances of getting in the NCAA tournament and of getting the best seed you can, then you're going to want to use analytics to help you maximize your schedule, which is, again, something we do. All right, so those all fall under the heading of just helping you win games, your program being better by using analytics. And we could probably think of more examples, but I want to touch on a second advantage to using analytics that I think's, really important here today, because I don't think, the folks that are here, we wouldn't be here unless we were invested in our own professional development. And, Rising Coaches is an organization that's really based in large part on professional development, right, as a value. So I would just say this to everybody: a working understanding of analytics is going to enhance your skills and your brand as a coach. All right. I think that, again, if this wave is inevitable, if this is where the game is going, that's going to become more and more the case. So if you aspire to work in the NBA one day and you're not an established coach at that level, you're not a former player with some name recognition, I think if it's not already true now, it will be true soon. It's going to be hard to break in unless you're fairly well versed in analytics. I think that's only going to become more and more the case. I think even at the college level with certain coaches, even certain ADs, that's a really important piece in, who they hire, basically. And so I think both from a skill standpoint and a brand standpoint, this will enhance, you as a coach. And we all know how it works, right? Your brand is what people think of you. It's how you market yourself. It's maybe how you get the job. For example, your skills are actually the tools in your toolbox that are going to enable you to be successful once you have that opportunity. And, you really want to enhance both. And I think, understanding analytics and how to incorporate them in your program helps with that. Okay. So Colton, you've convinced me. Analytics are important for all these reasons. How do we actually improve our analytics operation, right? I'm a head coach. I'm an assistant. I'm thinking right now that we got practice coming up in a few months and I'm stuck at home and I need a project. So how do I actually do this? Well, there's a couple ways to look at it, but I'm the type of person that likes to think big picture first, right? What's the end goal? What's the overarching idea here? And then work down from that to some details. And so, we kind of have a way to explain it, and kind of a cute little saying here, but we want to help you, or, your goal should be to use better data, all right? And to use data better, right? You guys see what I did there? But, those two things really do sum up what we're trying to do, or what you should be trying to do. So use better data is, what stats are you looking at? What stats do you have access to? Are there better stats, more helpful stats, maybe that measure what you really want to measure here, that you can use? So we want to train ourselves to use better data, but we also want to train ourselves to use the data better. So maybe you already have access to really good data and everything you need is right at your fingertips, but do you understand how to interpret those numbers, how to apply those insights? I think it's like a lot of things, for you young coaches, or for those of you who've been doing it a long time, think back to when you first got started, maybe the first time you ran a practice by yourself, or the first time coach let you do, a skill development session by yourself. You were probably pretty nervous and you probably didn't do your best job ever. You probably started out at a certain level, and then the more you did it, the better you got, right? That's just, as coaches, we develop our skills through practice and repetition. And I think analytics is the same way. So you're going to have to start somewhere, and you're going to learn as you go. But the earlier you get started and the more you invest in it, I think the quicker you're going to improve. Here's another way to think about it. So one way is we want to use better data. We want to use data better. You could also put it this way, and I like to think of this as a 3-step process. If you forget everything else I said, I think this slide will be really helpful as a takeaway. But the 3-step process is this: you want to collect the data, interpret the data, and apply the insights. And it's crucial that you do all 3 things. In my mind, that 3rd step is the most important one. And I think a lot of, organizations, a lot of coaches will start the process and never make it to the end. But what have we done if we've spent a lot of time going out and charting or collecting data, whatever fashion that takes, and then we've looked at the numbers and had people do reports or spend our own time doing those reports, but we never got to any practical application? We've really just wasted a lot of time. and possibly a lot of money, right? There has to be application at the back end. At the same time, if our data is bad on the front end, if we're looking at the wrong numbers, or the collection process is somehow off, then the insights are going to be off, right? Because we're not looking at good data. So it's a 3-step process there, that I think is every step is crucial. All right. I'm going to show you guys a slide. This is something I've been working on for a while. I've never shown it to anybody. So we're unveiling it here for the first time. But it's just, again, the way my brain works of starting with the big picture, working our way down. I want to kind of get into some, Adam, just FYI, it says 2 people are in the waiting room for the meeting. I don't know if you have access to that.
Yeah, thanks.
You're welcome. But I want to get into some specific stats here to actually start thinking about how you evaluate a team, how you evaluate your own team or even an opponent. And so I want to start with the most important thing. And from an analytics perspective, if I'm coaching, the most important thing is my team's efficiency margin. That's going to determine if I'm winning or losing. It's going to determine over the course of a season if I'm a good team or not. And the efficiency margin is really simple. It's your offensive points per possession minus your defensive points per possession. It's on a per possession basis. How much better are you than your opponent? A lot of you probably are familiar with KenPom. Certainly if you work in Division I men's basketball, you are. He ranks teams on his site based on efficiency margin. Now his is adjusted, which is important if you're comparing teams. You want to make sure that strength of schedule is factored in there. But he makes that one adjustment for strength of schedule. But other than that, this is the best way to evaluate teams. So this is, at the end of the day, this is what we care about the most, right? How efficient are we in terms of our efficiency margin? All right, next step down on the pyramid here. Pretty straightforward. Offensive efficiency and defensive efficiency. We know as coaches that the 2 ends of the floor do affect one another, right? The way we guard can affect our offense. The way we play offense can affect our defense. But by and large, we look at those as 2 separate buckets, right, of stats and 2 separate areas to address. But obviously with the disclaimer, there is some overlap there. But we want to think about how to maximize our offensive efficiency, how to maximize our defensive efficiency. All right, next step down would be to look at the 4 factors. I'm going to tell you what those are in a second. A lot of you probably already know. These were popularized, not really popularized. These were invented or identified. It's probably the best way to put it, by Dean Oliver. He wrote a book, Basketball on Paper, back in, I think, 2002. It's really the seminal text of basketball analytics. Anytime anyone asks me for a book recommendation, I say Basketball on Paper. And then if they ask me for another book recommendation, I say, I don't know, because that's the only one I'm aware of that's out there that's really good. I'm sure there are others. But the 4 factors are the stats, the team stats that have the greatest impact on efficiency, all right, on each end of the floor. And here they are. Effective field goal percentage. That's just how efficient you are from the field. Your turnover rate, your offensive rebound rate, and your free throw rate. Free throw rate measures how often you get to the line. All right, so KenPom identifies those on his site. A lot of NBA teams, they all use these, but they've even started like putting these up on the center hung scoreboard. I've seen a couple NBA games in different arenas where they'll tell you what the 4 factors are during the game, which I think just is a testament to how analytics are kind of going mainstream. But at any level, again, high school, anywhere above that, all the way up to the NBA, I would be focused in on these 4 factors. Defensively, it's the same 4 factors, right? So that's nice. You're looking at the same group of stats on each end of the floor. Another way to look at offensive efficiency, and in addition to these 4 factors, or maybe to look at a breakdown between half-court offense, transition offense, and then as a subset of half-court offense, your late clock offense. All right, how are we in these different scenarios? And to take that one level deeper, within half-court, you could break down your man and your zone efficiency, right? You're going to see both. Every team out there over the course of a season is going to see both. You could break out your 1-3-1 versus your 2-3 versus your 3-2, what have you. If you wanted to get that detailed and you kept up with that data, you could. From a transition standpoint, I think it's helpful to think about both volume and efficiency. So your transition points per possession is just how efficient you are. We measure volume with a stat called TCR, transition conversion rate, which measures how often a team runs or has a transition possession when they have an opportunity. So here's what that means. It means that after a steal or a defensive rebound or an opponent make, right, any scenario where we can basically grab that ball and get it out and go, how often is that next possession 7 seconds or less? It doesn't mean you're scoring. You might be turning it over a lot, but it measures how quickly you are playing. We found, based on last year, the national average is about 28%, and some teams are down at 20 and some teams are pushing 40. There's a variance there with how fast teams play. So it's important to look at that, I think, for your own team and your opponent. We'll get there in a second. Defensively, another way to think about kind of going a level down from overall efficiency is very similar, but with a slight twist here. You look at your half-court defense, your transition defense, and then if you're a pressing team, maybe look at your press defense. And that's something that has always stuck with me. When Coach Grant, Anthony Grant, was at Alabama, my first boss at Alabama, we pressed a lot. He comes from that Billy Donovan, Rick Pitino coaching tree where, some have gotten away from it a little now. And it's not as trendy in 2020, but for a long time, the press was a big part of those defensive systems. And so if that's the case for you, you need to track efficiency. Is our press helping us, hurting us? Where are we strong? Where are we weak? Again, some of the same breakdowns here with your half-court defense. If you play zone, if you mix it up, you need to know how efficient you are in both. And then again, transition-wise, are you letting teams run? Are you letting them get out a lot? And then when they do get out, are they efficient? The next level down here, you can really – yeah, go ahead, Adam.
We've got a question here from Lucas. Lucas, do you want to introduce yourself and ask your question?
Yeah. My name's Lucas Worrell. I'm at Ashland University. With the efficiency margin, what would you say is like a decent sample size? Like how many games before you can come up with like a conclusion with how good of a quality a team is?
Yeah, that's a great question. One reason I partnered with my business partner, Matt, is because he's like an expert in that stuff. And so usually I have him there to answer those types of questions. I think that in general, 7 or 8 games is like the minimum amount of time, we want to give a team before we start drawing any conclusions. But if your schedule is front loaded with difficult teams or easy teams, you want to keep that in mind when you're thinking about that.
And then with the 4 factors, I know you can do effective field goal percentage and probably like all those can apply individually, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll talk about individual stats here in a minute. Yep.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. Do we have another question, Adam, or we're good?
That was it for now.
Okay.
If you guys do have questions, though, yeah, please drop them in the chat.
So the next level, you really could take any one of these stats and break it out. So for example, you could take offensive rebound rate and you could say, well, our team offensive rebound rate is, let's say 30%, but let's look at our rebound rate on shots at the rim versus 2-point jumpers versus threes, or shots in the paint versus shots out of the paint, or however you wanted to slice that out and see just a little more specifically what our strengths and weaknesses are. I'm going to show you an example here of effective field goal percentage, taking it a little deeper. I think this is kind of the next logical step because effective field goal percentage is really the most important stat on each end of the floor. It has the greatest impact on efficiency. So how do we dive a little deeper into what makes up a team's effective field goal percentage? Well, it really comes down to 2 factors: your shot selection and your shot efficiency. All right. You could break down shot selection really to make it infinitely complex if you really wanted to. You could have 8 zones on the floor, 12 zones on the floor. We just, for simplicity's sake and really so our clients aren't overwhelmed, we look at 3 types of shots: shots at the rim, shots that are threes, and mid-range shots or non-rim twos, to be a little more technical. And with each of those, we look at 2 stats: what percent of a team's shots come from that area, we call that shot distribution, or shot selection. And then we look at your field goal percentage from that area. Okay. And so both of those factors, right, make up effective field goal percentage. You can be an incredibly good 3-point shooting team, but if you rarely take threes, it's not going to have much of a positive impact on your overall effective field goal percentage, for example. Or you can be a terrible mid-range shooting team, but if you avoid those shots, you can still have an excellent effective field goal percentage, right? Those two things are both important. And then obviously, how well do you shoot free throws? It's actually more important to get to the line than it is to shoot, let's say 10% higher once you get there. But it is important. There is a significance attached to your free throw percentage as a team. Defensively, right, it's the same thing. From a shot selection and efficiency standpoint, where are our opponents taking shots and how efficient are they? I did not include opponent free throw rate. I don't believe that you have much effect over that. And then I think that the base level of the pyramid would be individual player stats, and we'll dive into those a little more later in the presentation. Okay, there's stats that aren't included on here. Obviously, you can't say everything, but I think from just a framework of evaluation, this is useful for me as a diagram, thinking about what's the main thing. Let's keep that at top, and then work our way down from there. And a lot of this may seem, I guess for some of you, it may seem like a lot and new. I'm sure there's some of you here who think this is really simple, obvious stuff. But sometimes there's a lot of insight in simple stuff if you just sit there and actually look at it and evaluate it. It'll give you a lot of answers. All right, so let's talk about self-scouting. I'm going to put myself in, the coaching chair, so to speak. I think when you are trying to scout your own team, evaluate your own team, goals are really important. Every coach out there, I think, is goal oriented. We talk to our players about it. We probably write down our goals. I think that's very helpful. I think it's very helpful to attach numbers to those goals, right? Whether we like it or not, I'm not going to get on my soapbox for too long here, but whether we like it or not, basketball is a numbers-driven game. We keep score. There are points, right? We keep track of possessions. We keep track of rebounds. Like, we need to have some numbers attached to our goals, or else they really don't mean much. But before we get there, I think you have to start with a less analytical and a kind of a more personal question. And that would be this: what is my identity as a coach? What do I value most? Now, I'll say that my values have been shaped as I've gotten deeper into analytics. Like, that's changed my values somewhat. But I also think there's a kind of an aspect to our personalities that is just kind of intrinsic to who we are. And just to speak for myself, and this is not really the way the game is going right now, but I've always loved the defensive side of the ball. I've always really been attracted to kind of hard-nosed man-to-man defense, deny the passing lanes, pressure, try to dictate the flow of the possession. We had a lot of success early on at Alabama with that, which is maybe one reason I'm that way. You may value something differently. You may value skill and shooting and spacing and ball handling and, taking care of the ball. You may value toughness. You may be a zone, whatever. But you have to think about what's your identity, what do you value? Because you're not going to be a successful coach if you're not coaching in line with your values. I think the second question that's equally important is, what personnel do I have? And maybe you're in a position where, I've been the head coach here for 10 years, and all the players in my program are players I recruited, and they fit my values and my identity. But a lot of times that's not the case. So last year we worked with 2 teams that had brand new coaches. Nate Oates at Alabama, John Brannon at Cincinnati. And both of those individuals inherited a roster. And in both cases, like, they had talent, but I would say that the personnel did not line up perfectly with their values and their preferred style. All right, so you really have to think about both of those. And then based on your answers to those 2 questions, I think you start to ask this question: what will our team's identity be? And that's really dictated by what you emphasize. All right, so what are you going to emphasize with this group? All right, and here's where I think now you begin to add in possibly some statistical markers with these goals. And the way I like to put the question, this just makes sense to me. I think as a coach, it's a question I want to ask myself: what is our team's unique statistical formula for success? You may not know that on the first day of practice. You may not know that on opening day, but a few weeks into the season, you need to have an understanding of what is your team's roadmap to victory from an analytic standpoint. What are your strengths and your weaknesses, and how are you going to win games? So let me give you a couple of practical examples of how that might play out. All right, so I've mentioned both these teams before. I think Dayton, I don't know if I mentioned Dayton actually, but that was one of our clients last year. They obviously had a fantastic season. Here was their statistical roadmap to success. All right, and obviously this is all in hindsight now, so it's a little easier looking back on it. But they had the number 2 adjusted offensive efficiency in the nation. All right, they were an offensive powerhouse. I think Gonzaga was number one by just a smidge, but on a points per possession basis, adjusted for strength of opponent, these guys were number two out of 353. Elite offensive team. And the reason they were is because they had the number one effective field goal percentage in the nation. And to go one layer deeper, they had the number one rim field goal percentage in the nation on high volume. And if I were to go one level deeper than that, I didn't put it on the slide, but Obi Toppin, who was the National Player of the Year, I'd love to make this a trivia question, but I'll just give you the answer. He shot 78% on rim shots this year and was one of the highest volume rim shot takers in the country. Obviously, that's a really good cornerstone to build your offense around. Now, the other aspect of Dayton's offense, it's, we don't put every stat up here, but I'm just going to mention it, is they started 5 shooters, and their 6th man was also a really good 3-point shooter. So the guys that played the majority of their minutes all spaced the floor. They play a lot of 5 out. So, because the gravity of those offensive players helps space, clear out the lane, essentially, guys like Obi Toppin or Jalen Crutcher or Trey Landers had an easier time when they did get to the rim to finish. But on the offensive end, Dayton won with offense. That was their roadmap to victory, their statistical formula for success, and they did it with finishing at the rim. They were able to get to the rim and finish. Defensively, Dayton was good. I think they were top 40, but they weren't elite. But here's what they did well defensively. They forced their opponents to take bad shots, a lot of 2-point jump shots. I think 8% more than the average. I think they were at 34%. Their national average was 26. On top of that, and this really flew under the radar, but they were elite in this area, they limited opponent transition opportunities. So that stat I mentioned earlier, transition conversion rate, defensively, they were 14th in the country in terms of having the lowest TCR. So their transition points per possession wasn't that great. The teams were able to score, but what they were great at is actually limiting those chances. So Dayton's roadmap to victory, or their statistical formula for success, was we lead on offense because of our effective field goal percentage, which is really based on our ability to get to the rim, create opportunities for our players to finish at the rim. Defensively, we're going to be good, not necessarily great, but the areas we're going to do really that we're going to emphasize are transition defense, getting back and stopping teams from getting out in transition, and then trying to force opponents to take shots that aren't high value shots. And you notice there's a lot that's not on here. Like Dayton was not a great rebounding team on either end. They did not force many turnovers. They weren't a big free throw margin team. That wasn't their roadmap. That's a roadmap for other teams, but for these guys, this was it. All right, so let's contrast that to Cincinnati. So Cincinnati did not have the level of success Dayton did. They weren't the number 2 team in the country, but they won their conference. They won the American Conference. They won 20 games against a really difficult strength of schedule, and they were poised to make the NCAA tournament in Coach Brandon's first year. So they had a successful season. They were a very good team. Their roadmap to victory was very different. So they were a team that was built on defense. They were solid on both ends, but better on defense. And defensively, they were elite in terms of their effective field goal percentage defense. Teams were not efficient from the field against them. All right, 2 reasons for that. Number 1, similar to Dayton, poor opponent shot selection. They discouraged shots at the rim. They took away the 3-point line, and teams took a lot of mid-range shots. And then when teams did get to the rim, they were elite at rim defense. All right, they were a long team. They had depth in the front court. They blocked and altered a lot of shots. Offensively, right, they had their areas of struggle, but what they were really good at was they had a high offensive rebound rate, a high free throw attempt rate. They got to the rim a lot. They got to the free throw line a lot. And then in terms of field goals, they were at the rim. Everything was at the rim, and they were really efficient there. Again, you'll notice some things aren't included. They were a bad jump shooting team. There's no other way to put it. They just weren't good at it. They turned it over a lot. So they're not perfect. You're never going to be elite in every category. Yeah, I've actually done this. When I was back at Alabama, having conversations with our coaches about setting goals in these categories. You go back and look at, Villanova a few years back, or some of these Duke teams or Carolina teams, the best teams you can imagine. And they're obviously very good teams, and they're usually good on both ends, but they're not going to be elite in every area in terms of the 4 factors. So you need to understand for your team, are you more of a Dayton? Are you a Cincinnati? Are you a totally different type of team? But what's our statistical formula for success?
Hey, Colton.
Yeah.
With the Cincinnati example, Do you think those stats represent like Coach Brannon's philosophy and what they emphasize, or more like what was left over from like the Mick Cronin teams?
That's a great question. I actually meant to mention that. I'm glad you brought that up. Now, that's not really his DNA as a coach. He had to adjust to his personnel quite a bit. If you look at his teams at Northern Kentucky, skill, low turnovers, good 3-point shooting, probably a little bit better on offense than defense. But that's just not what he inherited. So he kind of had to adjust to his personnel. Okay. So if you understand what your team's, unique statistical formula for success is, then you're going to want to set some team goals, obviously based on your strengths and weaknesses and then your points of emphasis. And I'm a big proponent of sharing those with your team. I also think from game to game, it's important to set goals. And those may differ based on the quality of your opponent and the strengths and weaknesses of your opponent. Now, I'm not saying that as a coach, you should come in there with a totally different set of numbers every game. I think there's value in continuity, and we do get pushback from almost every coach we work with when we talk about game goals. Like, well, I can't change the goal every game for my players. And we get that, I don't know that that's a useful way to go about coaching your team, but I do think as a coach, you need to understand that if you go on the road to play Kansas, right, what constitutes a good offensive performance is probably different than if you play the worst team in your conference at home, right? 1 point per possession is probably a good outcome. At Kansas, it's probably a really bad outcome in that other scenario. And I think it's important to, when you're measuring success after the fact, understand, what the goal was relative to my opponent. So the great thing about goals is once you set them, now you have a measuring stick right on the back end. So measuring team performance relative to goals. Really, after a game, you're going to ask two big questions, or maybe at the end of a season, or maybe after every 10-game stretch, you're going to ask some questions. And the two big questions are going to be, do we play well on offense? Do we play well on defense? And then that's going to be something you measure in terms of points per possession, right? But then underneath that, you're going to have some specific questions you ask that are going to depend on your points of emphasis, your identity. And I just put a few examples up there, of types of questions you might ask. But again, we want to attach specific numbers. So I'm going to get into some nitty-gritty numbers now moving forward. And you're going to see some reports that we did, for our clients. So I just kind of pulled this one out at random, but this is what we call our game goals. And again, there's a lot of data on here. We're not using anything that isn't widely available that you don't have access to in your own program. I think we're really good at, digging through the data, pulling it out, putting it in a presentation that makes a lot of sense for our clients. But there's nothing here. We don't have access to anything you don't have access to. All right. So this is a game, St. Louis at Dayton in February this past year. So here's what our game goals look like. We had an offensive set of goals and a defensive set of goals. And again, this is predicated on the two teams in the game. So Dayton was averaging 1.18 points per possession. That's adjusted for strength of schedule, which is, again, second in the country. St. Louis is a very good defensive team, giving up 0.95 adjusted points per possession. So Dayton's overall goal for this game was lower than their season average because they were playing a very good defensive team. So we told Dayton going in that 1.13 would be, a goal. Our goals are set up to be realistic based on data, but also they're set up to where if you meet the goal, you're going to win. Even if you're an underdog, we'll tweak these goals so that they're going to result in a W for you. But again, if you're playing an inferior opponent, the goals are going to help you play to a standard, right? Instead of just trying to win the game when maybe you're significantly better than your opponent. And then below here, you can see all the key stats, the 4 factors, stuff like transition conversion rate we've been over, all your shot selection and individual shot type efficiencies are all down here. And we know what Dayton is doing offensively, what St. Louis is allowing defensively. And based on that, we come up with a set of goals. And those are really going to be important on the back end when we evaluate performance. We also have a set of defensive goals, right? These are based on St. Louis's offense and Dayton's defense. St. Louis's offense was not very good. They were slightly above average. So Dayton's defensive goal was pretty low in this particular game. And then obviously all your individual categories below that. So that's game goals. Pretty simple. Again, I don't think coaches are necessarily showing this to their team, but it gives them an idea of what to expect and what's reasonable to expect. We all know, like, just kind of do this thought experiment with me. we all know that one team in our league, and maybe you're that team. We all know that one team in the league that just crushes the offensive glass, right? They recruit to that. They're super physical. They probably get away with a ton of fouls and over the backs. They're super deep. And every time you get ready to play that particular team, what's the emphasis in practice? Block out, block out, block out. 5 guys to the glass, be physical, match their physicality, right? Well, if they're averaging 40% offensive rebound rate, like what's a goal for us realistic going into that game? Or you might be playing a team, that plays 5 out, that has 5 shooters on the floor, that likes to pick and pop with their 5-man. And, what's the emphasis in practice that week? How are we going to guard them? Are we going to full rotate? Can we hedge and get back? These guys are going to just try to shoot us to death from out there. And so you can have specific goals for things like 3-point attempt rate, right? 3-point percentage against a team like that. So this is what it looks like on the front end, just when we do it. Here's what it looks like on the back end. So I'm about to switch over to a document that is going to have a lot more numbers and colors on it. We call it an HD box score. Everything we do is, HD something because we're HDI. So this is the HD box score. And the HD box score is developed, again, everything on here is pulled from data that's available to all of us. And it's really meant to take the place of a traditional box score because it has everything a traditional box score has on it. Obviously, the format is much different, and there's a lot more information on here. But the way we do this is, we obviously created a template. We pull in the data. It populates as soon as the game is over. We're able to get this to teams about 15 minutes after the game is over. So it's pretty close to instant, if not exactly instant. But before they're out of the locker room, usually before the coaches and media, they have this document emailed to them. And it's really designed to highlight the most important things and then kind of, again, work your way down into the specifics. So the most important stat is your points per possession, which is in this big box at the top right-hand corner. For this game, Dayton, they scored 1.13 points per possession, which, if you remember, was exactly their goal. So that box is coded yellow. Green, yellow, red. It's a very simple, basic color coding process we're all familiar with. Green is good. You beat your goal. That's excellent. Yellow is okay, adequate. Red is poor. You fell short of your goal. So overall in offense, they were okay. They performed adequately. These bubbles at the top are your key team stats, your 4 factors, and your shooting stats. What did Dayton do well in this game? Well, you can see the goal. Excuse me, I went back a slide. The goal here is this gray number outside the bubble. And then what actually happened is inside the bubble. So they were way under their turnover rate goals. They did a good job there. It's coded green. They got to the free throw line a lot. They made their free throws when they got there. They finished at the rim at a very high clip, 81%. Those are all positives. Negatives, the stuff in red. They did not get out in transition very often, right? This was a low transition opportunity game for them. Their offensive rebound rate was very low. Did not get many misses back. Their assist rate was low. Their shot distribution, that's these 3 bubbles at the top, was off. If you look over here on the right, they took 30% of their shots from what we call the mid-range. Their goal was 19 or less, so they were way off there, which obviously influenced the amount of threes and rim shots they got off. So these are all red. They didn't shoot threes particularly well. So it was kind of a game of some positive, some negative, and overall kind of just a mediocre to adequate performance. Below this top line here, we look at some tempo. We break out the tempo, how fast, how efficient were they in different parts of the shot clock, on possessions that began with a make, did they play fast or slow, all that, we slice that a few different ways over here. And then again, we look at the team stats from the perspective of half court versus transition, first half versus second half. We include all that there. And then at the bottom of the page are your player stats. And so, this page is obviously Dayton's offensive page. The next page will be their defense. And so we have offensive stats for their players, all the traditional counting stats, their shooting stats, and then some of these more advanced stats like usage rate, effective field goal percentage, et cetera. Defensive stats there for St. Louis. And then on the next page, the same format, but now we're looking at Dayton's defensive performance. So again, the most important stats, the big one at the top, they allowed 1.05 points per possession in the game, which was well above the goal. So even though Dayton won the game, right, they won this conference game at home by 6, from an analytics standpoint, it wasn't an incredible performance. Offensively, it was okay. It was good, some good and some bad. Defensively, overall, it was poor. And why is that? Well, the red are going to highlight areas of concern. We didn't force turnovers. We didn't keep them away from the rim. And really the main culprit here was St. Louis shot jump shots, 3-pointers and 2-point jumpers really well. All right. And I won't go down the rabbit hole of how much of that is related to luck, but it's certainly a conversation. What did Dayton do well defensively? They kept them off the glass. They kept them out of transition. They defended the rim, right? That's all right there. And then all the other stats as well. So do you guys see how there's a synergy between the goals that were set at the beginning and the evaluation on the back end? And so we're taking kind of the best stats, the 4 factors, and then the next layer down of important team stats that we can measure. And we're setting goals on the front end for each of those, both on it. You can do this for a full season. We do these HD box scores over the course of a full season. It's a great way to self-evaluate, but you can also do this after a game and just say, okay, in this particular game, what did we do? Good, bad, and ugly. And then last thing, and I think we might have some questions, so I'll pause after this. This is something we also include with the HD box score. Again, these shot charts are part of what you guys probably get in your game books with the play-by-play. We haven't done anything revolutionary here except just map out the shots for each team on a little shot chart that tries to give you a better picture of how efficient teams were from the field, where we take our shots from, and how well we shoot. Adam, we have any questions right now?
Yeah, Lucas, go ahead and ask.
Do teams like Dayton ever like set a sort of certain goal like for their pace, like how many possessions they want, or is that just sort of within their playing style?
I mean, I think it depends on the team. I don't think that was really important to Dayton, but a team like Alabama definitely cares about that. That probably goes back to the question of what do you value and what's your identity? And for Nate Oates, wherever he coaches, pace is going to be a priority. But for Anthony Grant, I don't think it is. I think from an analytics standpoint, pace is important to keep track of. And certainly in the scouting process, you want to know how fast your opponent plays and what they like to do when they play fast. But you can be really good offensively at a slow or a fast pace. So it's not like we're telling Dayton, you need to play faster, you need to play faster. Doesn't necessarily fit into the rest of the stuff they're trying to do. Anybody else?
I got another quick question. So, like, if you don't have managers or like some analytic people, like, and you're at halftime with the box score, like you can do the effective field goal percentage and the offensive rebounding and free throw rate. You can do that pretty quick by hand, but like, you just sort of eye like the turnovers and that stuff, or what would you recommend?
All right, that's a great question. So I'm going to actually skip ahead because I can answer that question pretty directly. So I'm going to skip to the very end of the presentation and show you guys like a chart that anyone can use at any level. And then we'll come back and we'll talk a little more about scouting and stuff and player evaluation. But just bear with me as we sort of jump through some stuff here. Close your eyes, guys. Okay, here we go. All right, so Lucas, this might be helpful. This is something I played around with this for a long time and then started using this during like the 2012 or 2013 season at Bama. It's really simple. It's an Excel template. I'm not going to win any awards for graphic design here, but it gets the job done. I call it a possession chart now instead of efficiency chart. It doesn't matter what you call it though. But the idea here is these small boxes on the, kind of in this middle section represent possessions in the game. And this is a way that if you're sitting there with a clipboard, you can keep track of what's happening possession by possession. Obviously offense and defense, right? This is your first half. And then over here, offense and defense in the second half. All right. And there's a very simple shorthand that goes in here. You probably can figure it out from looking at it, but 3, that represents a 3-point attempt. 2 is a 2-point attempt. You could get more specific and put R for rim attempt if you wanted to break that out, or L for layup. That's fine. F is a free throw attempt. X is a turnover. If the character is circled, that means the shot went in. So now you have a shorthand to represent missed shots and made shots, as well as turnovers on a possession by possession basis. And so I would keep this on the bench. And again, even at the high school level or you're at a small college, whether it's a student assistant, a volunteer assistant, a GA, a player who's injured, I mean, you could find somebody over there with this free set of hands. It does not take a PhD to keep this chart. And you're keeping up with what's happening possession by possession. Now, the beauty of this chart is you're going to know in real time, and obviously like at halftime or any point in the game, how many possessions there have been, right? There are 5 possessions per row, so you can count them up. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35 first half possessions for Alabama. Boom. It took me literally 3 seconds to get that number. Instead of trying to calculate from the box score an estimate of possessions that may not even be exactly accurate. I know because I kept up with it. UCLA had 36 possessions. Offensive rebounds are going to be represented anytime there are multiple numbers in a box, right? You're going to be able to see, you can quickly calculate things like turnover rate. In the first 10 possessions, there were 3 turnovers, right? I think that's a 30% turnover rate. What our coaches really liked is they can know like how many straight possessions have we gone without scoring, or how many stops have we gotten in a row, or how many straight possessions have they gone where they have scored. Out of the last 5 possessions, how many stops have we gotten? All types of questions like that in the middle of the game, you can have that information. And then we kept up with other stats. Everyone's got their kind of pet stats at Alabama. We were very defensive minded. So we kept up with clean stops, which is you get a stop, but it had to be no offensive rebounds, no fouls committed. And then kills, 3 stops in a row, live ball turnovers, anything you want to, you can also chart that on here. So this is during the game. And then after the game, here's what it would look like for us is I would just go back in that same Excel template and just insert, instead of my bad handwriting, like, insert legible characters. And that's easy. That's something that you can do in 10 minutes after the game. If you want to take it one step farther, what we did, what I did was I would watch the film, which I was going to watch anyway. And I would chart on each possession what type of defense was played. Was it zone? Was it press? Was it a transition possession? Was it man-to-man? And then I would color code these boxes, right, by the type of defense played. And then I would keep up with kind of those stats, just efficiency and turnovers, right? I didn't have effective field goal percentage, offensive rebound rate. You could do that. We didn't have the time. But what that allowed us to do was keep up game to game. And then obviously as you accumulate, you can keep up with the season's worth of data on how we performed versus a zone, how we performed versus a press, how our defense performed in these various scenarios.
Yeah. How do you chart a possession where the team's in like a 2-2-1, very light, you break it in 5 seconds, and then you spend 20 seconds going against a 2-3? Like, is that
so that would be for us an orange box press to zone.
Sorry, I saw
right?
that.
And there, there's going to be a little bit of human kind of decision making involved. Not everything's super black and white, but sometimes the possession would end against the press. Like they press you, you throw it away, right? They weren't in a zone or a man. So that's coded red. But if they had a soft zone, drop back and do a 2-3, and then we face their 2-3, that would be coded orange. Which, for the sake of keeping up with the data down here, I lumped in with the yellow so that whether it was a press to zone or an overall zone, we just kind of counted that the same.
Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. I can't stress this enough, guys. I know some of the stuff we do with HDI is like, my partners are professionals, so I hope you think it looks good. The idea is that it looks really good. You don't have to do that to get good data. Like this is something that literally any team can keep up with. All I had was Microsoft Excel. If you have Microsoft Excel and the ability to watch the game, you can do all this. And it's useful in the game, and then obviously as a resource after the game as well. All right, I'm going to go back. We're running long. I always run long on these things, but I do want to touch briefly on kind of the scouting process, player evaluation, and then maybe take a few more questions. So trust me, we're not going to spend too much time on each one of these. All right, here's where we were. So in terms of measuring individual performance, I want to give you guys some stuff to think about there. Someone mentioned it before. It might've been Lucas. All the 4 factors apply to individual players as well. So that's certainly a good place to start. But before we dive into those numbers, I want to kind of challenge you with this. When you're evaluating players, especially your own players, I think it's really important to ask this question. What did a player do with the opportunity that he or she had? Okay. And opportunity is not just limited to playing time. A lot of times opportunity has to do with their role in the offense. Are they touching the ball? Are they just a screener? When they do touch the ball, is it in a position where they can play to their strengths? Right. So there are different ways to evaluate that, but usage rate is a really good tool. You don't want to watch the film just to look at a stat. How often are they ending a possession with something they do, right? That's a good way to measure how involved they are. What types of shots are they taking? How efficient are they? A player that scores 4 points may not look impressive if you're looking at the points column, but if he's 2 for 2 from the field, that's obviously very efficient. That's a small sample size, but a lot of times players who are efficient in small roles, probably deserve to have bigger roles. All right. So look at efficiency, tempo free stats. So when you're looking at rebounding, instead of looking at total rebounds, look at rebound rates, for example, and then plus minus can be really useful. I want to give you guys an example of a stat that I think you could do at your level. If you have, again, we have access to this data. Any college coach does, but it's sort of a more advanced version of plus minus. We call it leverage, offensive leverage. And I've pulled players that aren't in college anymore. These guys played at Alabama a couple years ago. So let me explain what you're looking at here. So the top part here is offense. And Dante Hall was a really good player. He got called up and played for the Pistons at the end of the season this year. We wanted to evaluate his impact on our offense and our defense. And so here's how we did it. You could do a variation of this. We looked at all the possessions he was on the court, 1,051 at this point. How many points our team had scored in those possessions, what we expected the team to score. And that's a key here. And really for us, expected was what's the team's overall points per possession, their offensive efficiency. We were able to adjust that for strength of opponents faced in those possessions. Not every player plays against the same competition, even on your team. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but if a player misses games and the games they miss are against the best teams in your league, they've played against weaker competition than the rest of your team, right? Or if a guy is a sub who really only comes in when we're winning big, he in general is playing against weaker competition, for example. So not every player plays against the same competition. But essentially we compared the points scored to what we expected, and we saw the difference was about 0.04 points per possession in the positive direction. So he had a positive impact when he was on the floor, and then we compared that to when he was on the bench. And what we found that when he was on the bench, we were 0.08 points per possession worse than expected. So his overall leverage is the sum of those numbers. So his overall leverage was 0.12 points per possession just on the offensive end. We're better with him in the game than when he sat. That's a significant amount. That's a significant impact on offensive success. Dayton Ingram had a positive, but not to the same degree, impact on offense. Defensively, right, these were the numbers. Dante Hall, slight positive. Dayton Ingram, slight negative. And then if you add offense and defensive leverage together, you can calculate what we call total leverage, which is what's their overall kind of player. And you have to be careful. Sometimes it's more descriptive than prescriptive, but I'll just go ahead and say what was their overall impact on our efficiency as a team. It's not the perfect stat, certainly can be skewed by certain factors, but it's a useful stat to know, especially of your own guys. Who seems to be affecting our team in a positive way. And okay, I'm going to show you guys some templates for individual player evaluation. Again, like these are pulled from scouting reports that we did for Alabama. I'm going to look at just 2 players to show you kind of some differences. Both are really good players. So Nick Richards, first team All SEC, going to go pro, I believe. We put the most important stats at the top. Again, kind of in keeping with this philosophy of trying to focus on the big things and then work our way down to the details. But we look at playing time. How often is he playing? What's his usage rate? Our formula for usage rate's a teeny bit different than, say, Ken Palm's. Our average is 22. So this guy was average. Even though he's hyper efficient, he was not a high usage player. His offensive efficiency rating, that's a stat we calculate. It's supposed to be on a 0 to 10 scale for most players. He actually was above 10, which you almost never see. What that represents incredible efficiency. And then his leverage numbers, which we just went over, you can see right there. He had a very strong positive impact on the offensive end. The key stats on the left are 4-factor stats, shooting stats, basic stats that, you may not recognize every acronym, but we're measuring assist rate and turnover rate and where they're getting their shots and how efficient they are from the field. And then this table in the middle is more shooting stats, but now we can look at his half court, his transition, his late clock. And when you're scouting a player, sometimes it's good to know that, this is somewhat logical, but as a big man, he's much more involved in their half court offense, right, than he is in transition. The size of these rectangles represents volume, so he's more involved here. And at the bottom, some non-shooting stats: assists, turnovers, rebounds. And then over on the right, some defensive numbers: blocks, steals, fouls, rebounds, and then some more detail with rebounding. So, okay, he's a good offensive rebounder. Well, which shots does he rebound really well? Well, unsurprisingly, he's elite on missed rim shots, and then not nearly as elite on these jumpers in terms of offensive rebounding. Again, you can do this for your own team. You can do this for opponents. I want to contrast Nick Richards to Anthony Edwards, another guy in the SEC, very good player. I'm sure he's going to be a top 5 draft pick, but a different story statistically. So Anthony Edwards' usage rate is off the charts, high usage player. His efficiency is green, which is good, but it's not nearly as high as a guy like Nick Richards. And really, he's probably pretty close to being in the yellow territory, the mediocre territory. So instead of a guy who's low usage, high efficiency, you have high usage and kind of middling efficiency. And importantly, his leverage numbers are actually both negative. So without trying to get in too deep with why that is, if I'm his coach, or if I'm getting ready to play those guys, I want to know that information. And also, especially if I'm Tom Crean, I want to know why. Why was their offense slightly worse when he played than when he sat? Why was their defense significantly worse when he played than when he sat? There's a lot of possible explanations for that, but it's something I'd want to dig into. You see there's a lot less green over here overall. What was he good at? His assist rate was very high. Even though gets shots up, he's also strong in terms of being a facilitator. Gets to the free throw line, he finishes at the rim. Everything else is kind of average and to poor in some cases. His shooting, you can see, he's a high volume 3-point shooter, but very average efficiency. High assist rate, you can kind of see for yourself there. And then as a rebounder, he struggled. This section here, rebounding leverage, just shows how much better or worse the team rebounded when that guy was on the floor. So, his personal rebound rates aren't that great, and the team was worse off, from a rebounding standpoint when he played on both ends, which probably connects to these leverage numbers. But that's, just a different example of using these stats to look at individual player performance. And you can see how, if you're scouting a team, this type of thing would, be useful. So when you're getting ready to play a team, I think you need to ask some key questions. The first is, do you know what their unique formula for success is, right? Hopefully you've thought about your own, but you really need to be going into the game saying, in their locker room before this game, their keys to the game are, rebounding, winning the turnover battle, whatever it is. You need to understand that, who are you going against? Knowing their tendencies in half court versus transition, I think, is crucial. Where do they like to take shots, and where are they efficient, both from a team and an individual standpoint? And then I'll make this point. The more I do this for a living, the more I'm convinced this is really the right way to go about it. And I don't want to offend people who do the opposite, but it just makes a lot of sense to me that when I'm getting ready to prep for an opponent, I'm a big believer in going to the data or the stats first. I think that helps you answer the question of what does this team do? The numbers are going to give you a much better picture, a much more detailed and clear picture than video of what do they do well, what do they struggle with, what do they do a lot of. Just going to answer a lot of those what questions. And then I think you turn to video to answer how, right? So you may know this team takes a ton of threes, they play really fast, they generate a lot of turnovers, whatever it is. Okay, well, how are they doing that? And watching them on film is going to help you answer those questions. So if you already know the what's, before you go into video, your watching of the film is going to be much more focused and I think productive. So you can take that or leave it, but I do think that is a very logical way to go about the scouting process. I'm not, Adam, for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through this entire Wichita State scouting report, but I will just look at this first slide because it kind of sums it up. Cincinnati played these guys twice. They had a big home game against them at the end of the year. And their formula for success, Wichita State's, was They were elite on defense, right? Extremely low opponent effective field goal percentage, poor opponent shot selection, below average field goal percentages from all areas of the floor. Excellent defensive rebounding team, forced a lot of turnovers. So they were good in a lot of areas. You notice the one thing not included there is free throw rate. They fouled a lot, but overall they were elite defensively for these reasons. Offensively, pretty mediocre. They excelled at offensive rebounding. All right. So going into the game, and of course you can go a lot deeper with personnel and with transition versus half court and all that. And we did do that. And I think you should, but just on a big kind of broad strokes perspective, they're going to try to win games with their defense, right? They're going to try to use their defense to fuel their offense. And then when they're in the half court, their best offense is a missed shot. So that's who we're facing. And how do we prepare to beat that specific type of team? You can start with their KenPom page. It's great. I think that's probably one level down from what, is kind of the traditional scouting process. But then the more, I'm not going to go through these guys. I just think we're running short on time, but looking at their transition offense, their half court offense, late clock offense, looking at their overall defense. This is a good slide to look at. We'll just focus on this one, but defensively, you can see how much better than average they are, right? They're elite defensively in terms of their points per possession. And you can see here what they do well. Wichita State is the black bar, and the NCAA average is the blue bar. Well, they force teams to take a lot of 2-point jump shots. All right. They force teams into turnovers. When teams do shoot the ball, they're below average from every area. And then on top of all that, Wichita State does a good job of limiting offensive rebounds, especially on jump shots. So, they may be vulnerable here in terms of they foul. It looks like, they're a little bit vulnerable on the glass on rim shots, but, this gives you a more specific idea of what they're good at. Again, go through individual players. And then the last piece here, and I think this will more or less wrap it up, and I say this for last on purpose, is, a thing we place a lot of value on that you've heard me say before is taking all that data, looking at all those numbers, and trying to interpret and apply that data. So for us, the application was literally writing up a report on each player and then writing up a report on the team. And even though I'm showing this to you last, because this is what we would do at the very end of the process, we would put these notes at the very beginning of the scouting report, right? Or when I was at Alabama, and maybe I was in a position like, Kevin or Will or one of you guys who are on staff, and maybe your coaches depend on you for this stuff. Like, you may be the one pouring over all the numbers and you're working with the GA. At the end of the day, all the head coach may see is a one-page written report. Okay. I get that you're not necessarily going to go through every last detail with your head coach, but I do think this is a really crucial piece of the process. And if you can't look at the numbers and then put into your own words, into writing what those numbers mean and what that suggests we should do in the game or how we should coach our team, anything like that, then you're really not getting to that third step in the process, that application piece. Again, I know I went through the last few of those slides quickly. I am more than happy to send this entire presentation to anybody. None of this is, trade secrets. All these games have already happened. We're not trying to not share the information. I think the only other thing I put in here, I thought y'all might want to see another HD box score. You saw the one of Dayton and St. Louis. This was actually that Cincinnati-Wichita State game that Cincinnati won. And without getting into every detail, offensively, they played poorly. They did exactly what Wichita State excelled at. They took a lot of bad shots. They took 36% of their shots from mid-range. They only made 16% of them. It's not good. And they weren't able to get many offensive rebounds. But then defensively, they played excellent defense, which won them the game. And the things they did well defensively were they kept Wichita out of transition. That 21% is very low. And then they, but in large part because they kept them out of transition, the effective field goal percentage was really low. Wichita State shot the ball poorly from all these areas of the floor. And there's a lot more to it, but I'll kind of leave it there. There's your shot chart, and then you've already seen the possession chart. So I could go on. You guys got me going, but I know we probably need to wrap it up, and I'm happy to take questions about any of this stuff.
Nice. If anyone has any questions for Colton, feel free to jump in.
Hey, Colton, I have a question for you.
Yeah, Alex.
By the way, awesome job as always.
Thanks.
Had a question for you on the technical side, and maybe this is more be a little bit better directed towards your counterpart as you gave him credit earlier on. But if we're trying to get better on the, the being able to do the computer side, what might be some good technologies that we work on or learn? If it's Python or R or anything like that, what would be, I mean, I'm an Excel guy, but once you get beyond the spreadsheets, I really struggle on the higher level computer science stuff. What would be some recommendations you have if we're not only trying to, be able to calculate some of this, but also put it in a way where maybe we can do some more advanced things with it?
Yep. That's a really good question. And for the record, I'm in the same boat as you, Alex. I've gotten pretty good at Excel, but anything beyond that, it's a struggle. And my half joking answer is, that's what you hire us for. But no, my
you're
serious,
right. You guys are waiting. Hey,
But-
you've managed
but
to
my-
figure out how to take all this stuff that we don't know how to do and make a lot of money doing it. So you're smarter than the rest of us.
but my serious answer is, the beauty, and I think in general, as college coaches, I know you work in college, most of us here, I think probably do. The beauty of our situation that we don't take enough advantage of is that we exist within a college campus and within an entire academic institution. And so there are students on your campus, undergraduate and graduate, that are majoring in data science, probably, that can do Python and R in their sleep. And so if you wanted to build something like this out for yourself, to me, the more efficient way to do it, if you decide you don't want to work with HDI because you have a personal vendetta against me, is instead of going out and learning it for yourself, find someone on the campus who probably would be thrilled to do it. I mean, sports analytics is attractive to a lot of folks. And, you might take a little bit of your time to sit down with that individual, or I guess in today's world, Zoom with that individual and explain what you're trying to do. But I feel confident that at your institution or at Alabama or at Wisconsin or wherever you work, you can find someone to help. Just on a practical level, the company that has access to all this data is called Genius Sports. All right. They are the official data provider and kind of data warehouse of NCAA basketball at all levels, Division 1, 2, and 3, men's and women. So if you're a D3 women's coach, a D2 men's coach, a D1 women, anybody, you go to Genius to get your data. And don't quote me on this, but I think that teams have free access to their own data. But I think to get access to other teams' data, you have to enter into some type of contract. We have a contract with them, and we pay them to get that data. But once you get it, that's kind of the easy part, but once you get it, they're basically giving it to you in a form that, for me, it might as well be in Japanese. I don't know what to do with this file they've sent, but that's where I think a student who knows how to do data science can start to work with that.
Yeah, what you're saying is true about Genius. The way I get access to some of their stuff is all our sports information people. There you go. Get to that. They can give you some of it, mostly the stuff that would be, you would normally get from a sports information guy, the various books of stats. I'm a little disappointed with some of the robustness they don't provide. Like, I think they've got all the ability to do like lineup data and things like that, but they don't openly provide that. But they're depending on us to give them all the information basically as part of our agreement with them to make it happen. So I met with them at the Final Four a couple of years ago and did what I could on the Sun Belt side to try to get everybody in our conference on board, because at least if all the information's in one place, that allows all of us to build that data set as you kind of alluded to.
Yeah, that's a great thought. And I hadn't really thought about the conference angle, but I do think that's a useful kind of angle to take, right? Can the conference work out a deal to get that data from Genius? So at least maybe now you have access to the other teams in your league, right?
Yeah.
That's actually a really, really smart way to go about it. I don't know if that's helpful, but that's kind of what I would do.
No, that's why I asked. No, I appreciate your insight.
Any other questions for Colton?
Yeah, I got one. Chase Roby here. Colton, thanks for doing this again. I was tuned into the first one when Adam got you on here. That was impressive, and this presentation was even better. So thank you for that. Kind of on the same lines that Alex just hit on when he brought up the conference. So what's the struggle moving forward? Say if San Diego State was a client of yours, and now with that 20-game schedule, like, are you in their ear? Like, now they got a schedule a lot more difficult in the non-conference. What does that throw a wrench into things? Just kind of touch on that. I'm curious how that's going to play out.
Yeah, from a scheduling standpoint, Yeah, teams like San Diego State are in a somewhat of a difficult situation. Not impossible, but Cincinnati's in a similar boat. With a league like the AAC, kind of being similar to the MWC, where it's a multi-bid league, right? But it's not the strength of ACC, Big Ten, SEC, Big 12. So what that means is, I tell Coach Brandon this pretty often because we go back and forth on the schedule a lot. He gets mad at me, but I say, Coach, like, here's the reality: is on Selection Sunday, the committee's evaluating Cincinnati, and the primary teams you're competing with for bids are teams and conferences that are stronger than yours, right? Those Power 5, Power 6, whatever you want to use, those types of leagues. San Diego State's in the same boat. And the committee is not grading you on a curve because your conference is a 3-bid league instead of an 8-bid league. All right. And so if you want to give yourself not just an advantage, but really just kind of to be on equal footing with those schools, you're going to need to be a little more aggressive in your non-conference. Okay. And that's a little bit of an oversimplification, because just going out and playing the number 1 team in the country isn't necessarily the best thing you can do. But, one thing the committee does care about is quadrant 1 and 2 games, playing games against other teams in the field, and obviously how you perform in those games. You got to win some of them. And if your 20-game league schedule affords you with 7 quadrant 1 and 2 opportunities, and, Clemson's affords it 17, right? They just have more opportunities to build a resume than you do, right? So yes, you are going to have to be more aggressive. And what that can look like is a non-conference schedule that on first glance may seem, pretty tough. But what I tell Coach all the time is, it's tough because once you get into your league, and I'm not going to name specific teams and disrespect anybody, but we all know in those leagues, you look on the schedule and there's some not very good teams on that schedule, right? And that's the equivalent of going out and playing a bye game in a lot of scenarios. And the ACC and SEC teams out there, they don't have nearly as many of those. So personally, I think that, and I know some people disagree with me, but since you got me on this topic, I'm going to share this. I think that mid-major leagues going to 20 games is a mistake, because that's 2 games you take out of the coach's hand where he could have gone out and scheduled a high-value opponent, and you're probably instead giving him 2 league games that are, probability tells us they're not going to be very high value.
Yeah, you just hit on the last. What you just said was definitely, because I was reading it. San Diego State doesn't seem too happy right now with what their league kind of did.
Well, the A10 had that same debate, and they held steady at 18, which I think is the right move. But there are a lot of factors pushing conferences to go to 20. And all the coaches don't understand the analytics side. They're like, well, that's 2 fewer games we have to schedule. Great. Everyone hates scheduling, so they like that. I think also there's this idea that, well, if the ACC did it and the Big Ten did it, well, we should be doing it too. And that's where you have to explain or try to get the point across that, when the Big Ten adds 2 more games, those are high value games. And in fact, the Big Ten going to 20 games presents a different set of challenges. Now, instead of so what happens to San Diego State when they go to 20 in their league is, well, now it's just more challenging for us to add value with 11 non-conference games instead of 13. So we have to be just more strategic, and we can't take on much dead weight in the non-conference at all. The opposite problem is true in the Big Ten, because that league is so good. When you go to 20 games in the Big Ten, now your biggest concern is scheduling too difficult, right? Because the committee isn't just driven by numbers. Not everything they do makes perfect sense. And one of the things you'll notice is that no matter how good your net is, no matter how strong your strength of schedule is, if you have more than 15 losses, they basically shut the door on you, right? And every year there are teams with really strong resumes, really strong net ratings, who overschedule themselves. And I think, obviously going to 20 games contributes to that.
Any other questions?
Hey, I've got a question. Quinn Peterson from the University of Missouri.
What's up, Quinn?
You mentioned basketball on paper.
Yeah.
And in that book, he talks about floor percentage. Is that a stat that you have looked at or found any value in?
Man, it's familiar to me. I don't use it on a daily basis.
Okay.
Got the book behind me on the shelf, but that would take too long to thumb through it. Okay. Do you remember what it measures? Because I don't remember off the top of my head.
Ultimately, just on what percentage of your possessions do you score or contribute to scoring?
Is it an individual player stat?
It's individual and team.
Oh, okay.
If you don't, you pretty much answered my question in that it's not that valuable. I was just curious if you used it or not.
It may be a really valuable stat, but I don't use it. You know,
Gotcha.
I'll probably go look at it now that you've brought it up after we're done here because I'm curious.
Cool. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome, Quinn.
I got a question for you, Colton.
Yeah, Ben.
Do you guys take into consideration at all or find any value in expected shot value rather than actual?
Oh, I love the concept. I think that that's where the game is going. And maybe I'm wrong. I'd love to be pointed in a direction, to prove me wrong. But right now, I just don't know that there's the data. We don't have the cameras and we don't have all the data we probably need at the college level. Mm-hmm. There may be exceptions to this, but in general, we don't have the data to calculate that in any way that's reliable. So, I definitely, that's like a fantasy of mine, is to be able to get access to data. Where's everybody on the court, right? And where specifically, well, we do know where the shots are taken from. What we don't know is where the other teammates and defenders are, when the shot goes up right now at the college level. But, and I think you would need that information to calculate something like that. But, I've never done NBA level analytics, but when I talk to those guys, that's a big thing at that level, which I'm sure you know all about.
Yeah, so the reason I ask is I put a lot of value in play call efficiency. I'm a very offensive minded guy. Mm-hmm. And I think that probably comes from my time in Houston, but I am constantly trying to find the most accurate way to evaluate play call efficiencies when you may execute it perfectly and get a wide open shot and you miss it. And all of a sudden on paper that reflects a bad possession when it was actually a good one.
Yep. So here's some food for thought. Like when we do our player leverage stuff, I didn't get into these details for the sake of time, but we not only look at how well the team plays, we look at individual stats. Like, okay, Dante Hall has a really positive contribution to our offensive efficiency. Well, why is that? And we can look and say, it's because our turnover rate stays the same and our free throw rate stays the same, but man, our offensive rebound rate goes up by 10% and our effective field goal percentage goes up and yada, yada, yada. One of the things we look at is how well we shoot at the free throw line and how well we shoot from three. And we correct to take out randomness, right, and luck essentially from those. And so we don't want the numbers to say we're much better or worse when this guy's in the game because, the team just happened to shoot really well at the free throw line in those possessions. And obviously, if he's a great free throw shooter, then yeah, maybe that contributes to it. But a lot of times it's randomness from teammate performance that can skew those numbers. So we don't do a lot of correcting like that, but we do in that instance. And I think what you're getting at is along those same lines, right? Like if we run this play 5 times in the game and we execute it 5 times and we get 5 wide open looks, we only make one of them. That could just be bad luck. It's actually a really good play for us, right? Mm-hmm. And that's where if you measure shots by expected value instead of whatever actual value, I think it's probably smarter. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, for sure. No, I get you on controlling for some things. I know when I've kind of built out this pretty complex spreadsheet to calculate, kind of automate all my stuff. I'm able to copy and paste my sports code sorter into Excel and it just runs all my play call data. But one of those things that I can control for is if you get to the free throw line, I don't care what the result is at the free throw line. That's a valuable shot. Like that's
a win.
Still going to be your most efficient outcome every time. So, I'm always just curious how everybody approaches that. I think that's something obviously at the NBA level that is becoming more and more important. And obviously that's ultimately why we've gotten the shot spectrum that we do across the league is just kind of a collected expected shot value based on corner three versus above the break three and so on and so forth. I'm also curious if there's any maybe trend in your eyes with the college 3-point line being moved back, if that will have any I guess expected changes or trends in differentiating your threes and how that affects offenses and defenses as well.
Are you talking about the change they made last year or just potential future changes in the distance?
Changed last year, I guess, mostly, but
the data didn't change much. I think there was a slight, and I haven't looked at it lately, but I want to say there was a very slight decrease in efficiency. And I don't remember if volume was affected. I want to say it wasn't. Does anybody here actually know? Did teams take fewer threes last year because the line got moved back? I want to say they didn't. From where I sit, in the numbers I see, I don't think that was very impactful in terms of the shots teams took and how well, they shot on those. Obviously, if you move it back, and it depends on how far you move it back, right? If you move it back another couple feet, now you're going to see some significant impact.
Yeah, of course.
But no, I'm glad you brought up. Sorry, Alex, I think you're about to say something. But I'm glad, Ben, you brought up expected shot value because I think that is coming, and that'll be something that we're into as soon as we can. But hopefully that's sooner than later.
Yeah.
Yeah, Colton, I had one more question for you. When you guys do your projections, how much do you guys take in historical data of a respective coach or program? Because, like, I know you referenced, the Cincinnati change, what they valued at Alabama, things of that. And, right now I'm lucky enough to work for a guy who's literally coached the entire Ken Pom era. So a lot of good data. And, one thing I tried to do going into next year, using this year's data and all the previous ones, is try to figure out, what are some reasonable goals to have on a per game basis using, more of the analytics. A lot of times coaches will say we need to force at least 13 turnovers or whatever. Mm-hmm. And the answer, that might be true, but a lot of times I think a lot of coaches use what I call them thin air stats. They just grab mm-hmm. a number and it sounds good and it may in fact be right. And anecdotally speaking, it could in fact be correct. Right. But I was going to ask about that part. And then also, looking at analytics using threshold numbers, like there's a certain point when you hit efficiency wise that you're basically going to win the game. If you shoot, when I did this analysis, when my boss's teams in conference play average 1.1 points per game on offense, which is a lot, but I think he's lost 4 games his entire career. And similarly, when he's allowed 1.1, he's won 8 his entire career. So do you guys use any thresholds when you guys set those projections to realize that when a certain number is hit, it almost triggers almost certain victory or certain defeat, or is it more complicated than that? How do you guys cross-check and look at those things? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. We don't do a lot with the threshold. I think that can be useful. I think a lot of times we used to have coaches on staff at Alabama. Reggie Witherspoon, he's the head coach at Canisius now, and he would be like, I looked at the numbers, and when you have more rebounds and fewer turnovers than your opponent, we win 90% of the time. And I would explain that's because, rebounding a lot of times is actually forcing teams to miss shots because the defensive team is going to get most of those. So you're actually measuring turnovers, rebounds, and field goal defense. So yeah, if you're winning those 3 stats, you're probably winning. And he's like, no, I'm just talking about rebounding. So we would go back and forth on it. I think those can be useful, descriptively, and I can see how a coach would, have access to that data and then want to set the goal there. And I think in a sense, when we set our game goals, again, I don't know how much I harped on this point, but we send those game goals to Anthony Grant or to John Brandon or Nate Oates or somebody. They're probably not looking at every single stat on the page with kind of equal interest, right? They're probably looking at, okay, what's our goal for turnovers? Okay, great. Let's make sure we're below 13 this game, or, offensive rebound rate. Let's harp on that. And I think every game is a unique set of stats and a unique set of occurrences. And so there's always going to be exceptions. which is why we always want to look at the whole picture. But, I think focusing on the stats that matter the most to you in that sense is probably useful. Alex, your first question, can you repeat it? Because my computer froze up for a minute. I didn't catch the whole thing. I'm sorry.
I think you just tripped me there. I think I lost where I was at in that one. So no, I like what your response was on the second one, though. I think I just talked for too long. I think I confused myself there.
I do that all the time. Okay. Well, if you remember it, I'm happy to answer it. You froze on me there for about 10 seconds.
Colton, I got another one for you. You talk about player leverage.
Mm-hmm.
Is that basically just on-off efficiencies? It's
on-off efficiencies adjusted for opponent, right? Okay. And compared to a baseline of what we expect the team to do. So it's, if Alabama averaged 1.08 points per possession on the season, and let's say they played a totally average or a totally representative group of opponents in Dante Hall's minutes, then we look at how they perform when he was on the court versus off relative to that 1.08 sort of baseline of expected performance, right? And I think that's important because he could be on the floor and they could be performing over that, and then he could be off the floor and it's not as much of a drop-off because maybe he missed some games. And in those games they perform well. I guess he would be off the floor when they missed the game. So that example probably isn't a good one, but I just think that's a logical way to do it. So yeah, it's more of an on-off adjusted for opponent strength.
Gotcha. All right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
I will, since you're interested in leverage, I'll make 2 quick points on the leverage stuff. And this probably applies to plus minus, any version of a plus minus type of stat. It's going to be influenced by who that player is on the floor with, right? If you have more of a platoon system where you play your starters and then you throw all your subs in, those subs may be really good players, but if the guys they're playing with aren't very good, let's say one of those subs is excellent, but then the other 4 aren't good, his leverage stats are going to be skewed in a negative direction, right? Because it's team performance when he's in the game and he's not getting the benefits of the good teammates. The other thing that skews that stat is how good the teammates are, how good your teammates are that don't play with you. And that one's a little more counterintuitive, but imagine this scenario. Imagine a scenario where, the point guard of the team's a really good player and, the team's really strong, but their weakness is their backup point guard is just not very good. And every time he comes in the game and the offense just bogs down. Well, that's probably going to make the starting point guard look really, really good in those leverage numbers because the off-court numbers are going to be really depressed. All right. Compare that to you have the same point guard with the same teammates that starts. His backup is really, really good. Right? He's a grad transfer. We have a ton of depth at point guard. When he comes in the game, we don't miss a beat. Well, now that point guard that starts the game hasn't changed at all. He's the same player, but because his backup's a lot better, right? His leverage numbers aren't going to look as good because now like that guy comes in and the drop off isn't really there. All right. The reverse is true. Let's say that you're the backup center, right? But the guy ahead of you is an All-American. You may be a good player, but compared to him, right, there's a drop off. And so your leverage numbers may skew negative because of that. And this is the type of thing we explain to coaches, especially when we're talking about their own team, that you have to look at these numbers in context. But I think that's true, again, whether or not you're looking at our version of leverage, plus minus numbers, box plus minus, any of these on-off type of stats, which is why to make a bigger point, never rely on one stat for your information. Like the more I think of it as looking at like a 3-dimensional object from multiple angles. So leverage is giving you this angle. That might be deceptive. So you want to look at usage rate to get this angle. You want to look at overall efficiency. And the more angles you can get, the better your understanding is going to be.
We have a question from Raul. Go ahead, Raul.
Hey, Colton. Awesome presentation, man. Just wanted to ask you a quick question. When you were at Alabama, and you guys are obviously doing these numbers, did you guys ever, like what you were just talking about, like compare the numbers of a guy who plays about 8 to 10 minutes a game to give value to that as a player against opposing teams? Because I think that's good too in a film way or going over things, to give that player more value than maybe he thinks, he is providing. Did you guys do that while you were there?
a little bit while we were there, a lot more so now, in the role I'm in now with our clients. But, I think that's a double-edged sword, because on one hand, you want to let that guy know, and this is more where the human element comes in, right? As coaches, we have to deal with that aspect as well. But on one hand, you're telling that guy, like, you're really important to us. You help us when you're in there. But I think you have to be prepared for the response of, okay, well, why don't you play me more? Yeah. Right. And so I think, we deal with coaches. In my role now at HDI, we're always talking to the coaching staff. We're not obviously talking to the players directly. That's the coach's job. But in what we do, a lot of times we'll say, hey, look, the data suggests, both his personal stats and the leverage stats suggest that, this guy that's kind of your seventh man that's playing 18 minutes a game is actually is affecting winning more than your starting, let's say, 2-man. And that's where, as a coach, we want to help coaches think through, again, evaluate your team. Am I distributing minutes in the most efficient way? So yeah, you certainly can do what you're saying. I think, depending on the player, if he has accepted his role and he just needs a little encouragement, like, that's great. Maybe the guy ahead of him is an All-American, so he doesn't expect to play a lot. And, but I do think you have to be prepared for that response, because a lot of times that's kind of the logical next step, right?
Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. Well, Colton, I appreciate you coming on. This was great. A couple of our guys were asking if they could have access to these slides. I don't know if you're comfortable
I can
sharing.
send the whole thing over. Okay. Adam, I don't know how you want to handle it, but I can send it over by email. So if those folks want to reach out to you, that's fine. If you can reach out to me directly, Colton at hdintelligence.com. You can text me.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
Yeah, where do I post it? In the chat here?
I was going to say you could post your email there, but should we just post the slides on the member site? Are you good with that?
I'm good with that.
Okay. You can send them to me if you need help doing it, or if you know how to do it, that's fine too.
Great. Yeah, I'm happy to do that.
Awesome. Colton, thanks again, man. This was great. Really appreciate it.
Sure thing. I appreciate you guys listening and engaging and being here. It was awesome. I enjoyed it.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Colton.